I still remember that night as if it happened just yesterday. The wind was light, but it carried a cold that seeped deep into my bones. My name is Joko, a truck driver with over 20 years of experience hauling goods between Bandung and Jakarta. I never thought I'd experience something so far beyond reason, something that defied every logic I've ever known. It was the night of November 12, 2017, around 1:17 a.m., when I was driving through the Cipularang Toll Road. The road was unusually quiet, only the occasional vehicle speeding past in the dark. A thick fog had begun to roll in, blanketing the asphalt and reducing visibility to barely 30 meters. I turned on my fog lights and slowed down, gripping the wheel tightly, focused on the dimly lit road ahead. That's when I saw her. Standing on the right side of the road, just beyond the shoulder, was a woman dressed in a long white dress, her long black hair cascading over her face. One hand was raised slightly, as if asking for help. My first instinct was to ignore her. So many stories had circulated among drivers about this stretch of road. Cipularang wasn't just dangerous for its sharp turns and reckless drivers. It was known for tragedies, unexplained accidents, and whispers of spirits who never left. Some said it was a former dumping ground for bodies. Others claimed it was cursed. But seeing her standing there, alone in the cold and fog, stirred something in me. Pity, maybe, or a sense of duty. I pulled over carefully, opened the side door, and without a word she climbed in and sat quietly on the passenger seat in the back. The moment she entered, the temperature inside the cabin dropped sharply. I hadn't turned on the air conditioning, yet my breath began to form mist in the air. Then came the smell. Wet, metallic, unmistakable. Blood. The stench of fresh blood filled the cabin, clinging to the back of my throat. I glanced at the rearview mirror and my heart skipped. In the reflection, I could see the seat, the dashboard, the road behind me, but not her. There was no reflection of the woman in the mirror. She was physically there. I could see her from the corner of my eye, but in the glass, only emptiness. My hands began to tremble. I tried to speak. "Ibu, where are we going?" But there was no answer, only silence. The engine noise seemed to fade, replaced by a heavy, unnatural quiet, as if time itself had slowed down. I tried to keep my eyes on the road, but I kept glancing back. Every time I looked, she remained perfectly still. No movement, no breathing, no shift in posture, like a statue. I turned on the radio, hoping the sound would calm my nerves, but all that came out was static, layered with faint, distorted whispers, words I couldn't understand, but that sounded like someone crying, pleading. I shut it off immediately. That's when I felt it, the weight of a gaze. I looked in the mirror again, and this time she was lifting her head. Her hair parted slightly, and though I didn't see her face clearly, I knew she was staring at me. Her eyes, black, hollow, without light, locked onto mine through the reflection. I felt a crushing pressure in my chest, like an invisible hand was squeezing my heart. I couldn't take it anymore. With shaking hands, I gently applied the brakes and pulled the truck to the side of the road. I turned around. She was gone. The back seat was empty. I stepped out into the fog, opened the side door, and that's when I saw it. Footprints. Wet, muddy, smeared with dark stains that could only be blood. They led from the seat, down the step, and across the asphalt, then vanished into the mist, as if she had simply dissolved into the night. I collapsed against the tire, gasping for air, my body numb. I wanted to scream, to cry, but nothing came out. Only a deep, paralyzing cold that spread from my feet to my skull, as if my soul knew I had just encountered something that wasn't meant to exist in this world. For days after, I refused to drive that route again. I asked a fellow driver to take my night shift. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not my family, not my co-workers. I was afraid they'd think I'd lost my mind. But weeks later, a friend handed me a local newspaper. In a small article on page 8, I read about a woman who had been hit and killed by an unknown truck on that same stretch of road 1 week before my encounter. She was young, in her mid-20s, reportedly arguing with her boyfriend before storming off on foot late at night. Her body wasn't found until the next afternoon, badly injured and covered in blood. The photo beside the article, long black hair, white dress, was unmistakable. It was her. I never reported what happened, but to this day, whenever it rains and fog creeps over the road, I can't help but glance at the back seat, terrified of seeing a reflection that shouldn't be there. After that night, nothing was the same. Sleep became a battleground. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, sitting in the back seat, motionless, her hair veiling her face. But in the dreams, she always turned toward me, slowly, deliberately. Her skin was pale, cracked in places, streaked with dried blood. Her eyes were hollow, deep voids that pulled me in, and her mouth slightly open as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. Only a faint vibration in the air, like a whisper trapped between worlds. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, sometimes screaming so loud my wife would rush into the room, frightened. She didn't know what was happening, and I couldn't bring myself to tell her the full truth, not at first. I only said I had a bad experience on the road. But the nightmares didn't stop. They grew worse. In one dream, she wasn't alone. There were others behind her, shadowy figures sitting in silence, all staring at me through the mirror. And in every dream, the truck kept moving. But I couldn't feel the wheel. I was no longer driving. Something else was. My behavior began to change. I avoided highways at night, even if it meant losing shifts and income. I started checking the back seat before starting the engine, even when I was alone. I'd knock on the door 3 times, a superstitious habit I picked up from an old driver years ago, to scare away bad spirits, he used to say. I never believed it before. Now I do it without thinking. One evening, my wife noticed me doing it and asked why. That was the first time I told her everything. How cold the cabin got, the smell of blood, the missing reflection, the footprints. She listened in silence, then hugged me tightly. She didn't laugh or call me crazy. Instead, she said, "Maybe she wasn't trying to hurt you. Maybe she just wanted to be seen, to be remembered." Her words struck me deeply. I had been so afraid, so focused on my own terror, that I never considered she might have been lost, confused, or seeking peace. A few weeks later, I decided to go back. Not to drive through, but to stop. I parked my truck at the same spot where I had seen her during daylight. I brought flowers, white jasmine, the kind often used in Javanese rituals for the departed. I placed them where the footprints had ended, near the edge of the guardrail. As I stood there, a sudden breeze passed through, rustling the leaves, and for a brief second, I thought I heard a soft terima kasih carried on the wind. I don't know if it was real or just my mind playing tricks, but the weight on my chest, the one that had been there since that night, lifted slightly. I didn't see her. I didn't feel cold, but I felt acknowledged. Still, the experience changed me forever. I retired from long-haul driving a year later, switching to local deliveries during daylight hours. I can't explain what happened that night with science or logic. The vehicle was checked, no technical faults, the weather was unusual but not impossible. Yet the footprints, the smell, the reflection, they were real to me. Some people say I imagined it, that fatigue and isolation caused hallucinations. Maybe, but I know what I felt. And I know what I saw. To this day, whenever another driver tells a story about a hitchhiking ghost on Cipularang, I don't laugh, I just nod slowly. And if they're willing to listen, I whisper one piece of advice. If you see someone in white late at night, don't stop. Or if you do, make sure you let them say what they came to say. Because sometimes the dead aren't trying to scare us. They're trying to tell us something we've forgotten how to hear. And in that silence between engine noise and the wind, in the stillness of the night road, their voices grow louder. I was lucky. I survived the encounter. But I carry her with me, not as a fear, but as a reminder that the world is wider, deeper, and stranger than we admit. And that some journeys aren't just from one place to another. Some are meant to cross boundaries no map can show. I never believed in ghosts before it happened. My name is Booty, a civil engineer from Solo, and I've always considered myself a rational man, someone who trusted data, physics, and logic. But on the night of March 17th, 2009, on the winding road leading to Tawangmangu on Mount Lawu, everything I believed in shattered. Our family had decided on a last-minute trip. My wife, Rini, our 2 children, Dion, 10 years old, and Raka, 7 years old, and my mother-in-law. The day had been sunny and clear, but as the sun dipped behind the mountains, a thick, unnatural fog rolled in, swallowing the road like a gray shroud. I was driving our 2008 Toyota Avanza, a car I maintained meticulously. The brakes had been replaced just 2 weeks prior, and I'd never had any mechanical issues. The road was narrow, full of sharp turns, and poorly lit. Only dim, flickering lamps every few hundred meters. I drove slowly, both hands on the wheel, hyper-aware of the steep drops just beyond the guardrails. Everyone knew this road was dangerous, especially at night. Then, as we approached the infamous Samara Lawu bend, I pressed the brake pedal and nothing happened. I stomped harder, panic rising. The pedal went all the way to the floor, but the car didn't slow. I tried the handbrake. It didn't respond. The vehicle accelerated downhill, pulled by gravity, the engine roaring as if possessed. I screamed, "The brakes are gone!" Rini shrieked, clutching the kids. Dion started crying. Raka froze in fear. I fought the steering wheel, trying to steer us toward the side, hoping to scrape against a tree or rock to slow down. But the road was slick with mist, and the fog made it impossible to see more than a few meters ahead. In the middle of the chaos, Dion suddenly shouted from the middle seat, "Soldier, Dad! There's a soldier sitting in the back!" I glanced at the rearview mirror. There was no one. The seat was empty. But Dion kept screaming, her eyes wide with terror. "He's wearing an old military uniform, Dad! It's dirty! He's looking at us, but he won't talk!" The next moment, the car veered off the road, flipped violently down the steep embankment, tumbling over and over, smashing through branches before landing upside down. Fire erupted from the engine. I was still conscious, trapped in my seat, blood streaming down my face. I turned and saw Rini motionless, her head slumped. My mother-in-law had been thrown from the vehicle. I tried to unbuckle my seatbelt, but my arm was broken and the pain was unbearable. Through the smoke and flames, I saw Dion. She was the only one who had been thrown clear, standing at the edge of the cliff, sobbing, pointing at the wreck. And then, between the smoke and the swirling fog, I saw him. A man in a tattered old military uniform, khaki green with faded insignia, the style of the 1950s Indonesian army, standing calmly beside the burning car. He wasn't burned, he wasn't injured, he just stood there watching us. Our eyes met. He looked at me not with anger, but with sorrow. Then, slowly, he nodded, as if saying goodbye. And just like that, he faded into the mist, vanishing as if he had never been there. I survived barely. Burns on my arms and face, a fractured skull, and a broken spirit. Rini, my mother-in-law, and little Raka didn't make it. Dion survived physically unharmed, but she didn't speak for 3 months. Doctors called it severe psychological trauma. I didn't tell anyone about the soldier at first. Who would believe me? But months later, while visiting a military museum in Surakarta, I saw a black and white photograph on the wall, part of an exhibit about the 1950s counterinsurgency operations against the DITII rebels in the Lawu region. It was a group of young soldiers, and there, in the back row, was his face, the same man I saw that night. The caption read, "Fallen Soldiers, Mount Lawu, 1959. Remains never recovered." I stood there frozen. He wasn't just a ghost, he was a guardian. And I realized some roads aren't just dangerous because of the curves, they're dangerous because they remember. After I was discharged from the hospital, I couldn't return to my old life. The office, the meetings, the blueprints, none of it mattered anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the fire, heard Rini's last breath, felt Rekha's small hand slipping from mine. But more than that, I kept seeing him, the soldier, standing in the fog, silent, watching. I became obsessed with finding out who he was, why he was there, and why Dion saw him too. I traveled to Tawangmangu again, not as a tourist, but as someone seeking answers. I spoke to elderly villagers, war veterans, and even a Juru Kunchi, a traditional caretaker of sacred sites near the old military outposts on Lawu's slopes. They told me stories that chilled me to the core. Decades ago, during the 1950s, Mount Lawu was a battleground. Soldiers from the Indonesian National Army fought a brutal guerrilla war against the DITI insurgents, a conflict marked by ambushes, disappearances, and mass graves hidden in the forest. Many soldiers died in isolated skirmishes, their bodies never found, their names unrecorded. Locals believed that some of their spirits never left. They became Penjaga Jalan, guardians of the mountain roads, appearing to warn travelers, especially at night when the veil between worlds was thin. Some said they didn't haunt the road out of anger, but duty. They were still on patrol. One old man, a former scout who fought in the region, looked at me with deep, tired eyes and said, "You were supposed to die that night, all of you." But he stopped it. Not completely, some things can't be changed, but he made sure someone survived. He chose you to remember. I asked how he knew. He didn't answer, instead he handed me a rusted dog tag he'd found near a cave years ago. On it, barely legible, was a name, Sarjano, rank private, unit 423rd Infantry, date of disappearance October 14, 1959. The same unit in the photo at the museum. I began researching. I found military archives, old field reports, and survivor testimonies. Private Sarjano was part of a small unit ambushed near Cemara Lawu. His squad was wiped out. His body was never recovered, but in one witness account, a fellow soldier who escaped the massacre claimed he saw Sarjano after the battle, standing on the road, covered in blood, waving him away from the path. "He saved my life," the veteran wrote. But he wasn't alive. I knew it. I visited the crash site again, this time in daylight. The car was long gone, but scorch marks remained on the rocks. I brought flowers, incense, and the replica of the dog tag I had made. I placed them at the edge of the cliff and whispered, "Terima kasih, Pak Sarjano. I don't know why you saved me, but I remember, and I won't forget." A sudden breeze passed through the trees, rustling the leaves in a pattern that sounded like footsteps. I didn't see him, but I felt him. And for the first time since the accident, the weight in my chest, the guilt, the grief, felt a little lighter. Today, I no longer drive at night. Dion speaks again, though she still hates foggy roads. She says she dreams of a kind soldier who tells her to stay safe. I've written everything down, not as a warning, but as a testimony. Because I know now that some spirits aren't vengeful. Some are still serving, still protecting. And on certain nights when the fog rolls down from Lawu and the wind carries the scent of wet earth and old uniforms, I pray for them, not out of fear, but out of respect. Because on that road, I didn't just lose my family. I met a guardian from a war no one remembers, and he gave me a second chance. I never thought fate could ride in the back seat of a taxi. My name is David Smith, and for over 15 years I drove a night cab in Manchester, England. I wasn't an easily frightened man. My routes took me through dimly lit alleys, abandoned housing estates, and past ancient cemeteries. I'd seen drunks, lovers, runaways, and even a few things I couldn't quite explain. But nothing prepared me for the night of November 3rd, 1998. That night, I met a passenger who shattered my understanding of life, death, and time itself. It was drizzling, the kind of cold, persistent rain that seeps into your bones. The streets were quiet, fog curling around the lampposts like ghostly fingers. Around 11:40 p.m., I was parked near Piccadilly Station when a man approached my cab. He was elderly, wearing an old-fashioned black suit, double-breasted, high-waisted trousers, a narrow tie, and polished shoes that looked untouched by the wet pavement. His hair was thin and white, his face pale and expressionless. But it was his eyes that unsettled me, flat, lifeless, as if he were looking through the world, not at it. Without a word, he opened the rear door and sat down. I asked, "Where to, sir?" His voice was low, raspy, like dry leaves scraping stone. "Cemetery Lane, St. Mary's Graveyard." I hesitated. The graveyard at this hour? He didn't answer, just sat there, hands folded on his lap, staring straight ahead. I shrugged and pulled away from the curb. The silence in the cab was thick, unnatural. I tried to make small talk like, "Cold night, isn't it?" But there was no response. I checked the rearview mirror. He hadn't moved. Not a blink, not a breath. The interior temperature dropped sharply. My heater was off, yet frost began to form on the inside of the windows. I turned on the defroster, but it did nothing. The rain outside grew heavier, and as I turned onto the narrow, potholed road leading to the cemetery, flanked by towering yew trees, it felt like we were entering another world. When I reached the iron gates of St. Mary's Graveyard, I slowed to a stop. "That'll be £12.50, please," I said, turning around to collect the fare. The back seat was empty. No trace of him, no damp spot from rain, no impression on the seat, nothing. But on the cushion, lying perfectly flat, was a banknote. I picked it up, confused, uneasy. It looked like a £10 note, but the moment I touched it, it crumpled. Not into paper, but in dry, brittle leaves, brown, fragile, shaped almost like currency, but disintegrating in my fingers like ancient parchment. I dropped it in shock, my heart pounding. I slammed the car into gear and drove away as fast as I could, hands trembling, breath coming in short gasps. I got home, poured myself a stiff drink, and tried to forget it. But the next morning, as I flipped through the local newspaper with my tea, I froze. On page 12, a small article about upcoming renovations at St. Mary's. Historic St. Mary's Cemetery to undergo restoration. Names of the departed to be preserved. Below it was a partial list of graves. My eyes scanned the names, and then stopped. David Smith, born 1952, died November 3rd, 1998. Plot C7, grave 14. November 3rd, 1998. Last night. My name, my birth year. But I was alive. I was sitting there reading the paper. I ran to the bedroom, pulled open the drawer of my wife Sarah's old writing desk, and found her diary from 10 years earlier. I hadn't read it in years. I flipped to a random page and read, "I had the most terrible dream. David died in a taxi accident. The car caught fire. His body was found near a graveyard. Plate number M578SMC. He was 46. I woke up screaming. It felt so real. I can't shake it." Our taxi's plate? M578SMC. My age? 46. The dream had been written in 1988, 10 years before it almost happened. I never went back to that graveyard. I quit night driving the very next day. No explanations, no notice, just handed in my keys and walked away. My boss thought I'd lost my mind. But how could I explain that I'd picked up a ghost who gave me a receipt made of leaves? That my own name was carved into a headstone on a date I was still breathing? That my wife had dreamed my death a decade before it nearly came true? I couldn't, so I stayed silent. Only Sarah knew the full truth. She didn't laugh. She didn't call me crazy. When I showed her the newspaper clipping and opened her old diary to that page, she went pale, then hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I've carried that dream for years," she whispered. "I didn't tell you because I was afraid it would tempt fate. But now I think it wasn't a warning, it was a memory from another path, another version of us." Her words chilled me more than the ghostly cab ride ever had. Because what if death isn't a single moment, but a door that opens on different timelines? And what if he, the man in the suit, wasn't there to take me, but to stop it? I started researching St. Mary's, old records, parish archives, burial logs, and I found something disturbing. In 1998, just days before my encounter, another taxi driver had died near that cemetery. His car skidded on the wet road, crashed into a tree, and caught fire. His name wasn't David Smith, but the plate number? Almost identical. M577SMC. One digit off. A mirror. A mistake. A swap. I couldn't prove it, but I believed deep in my bones that the man in the back seat wasn't just a spirit. He was a guide or a gatekeeper, and he had redirected death that night. He took the fare and left me with a warning written in decay. After that, I lived differently. I stopped taking risks. I held my family closer. I visited the cemetery once, broad daylight, flowers in hand, but not to find my grave. I found the one next to it. Elias Granger, 1890-1958, beloved watchman. A caretaker, a guardian. I left a single coin on the stone, not for him, for whoever stood in the shadows, still watching. I lived 5 more years. Heart attack, age 51, quick, painless, at home. When Sarah cleaned out my things, she found a note in my journal. I was supposed to die that night, but someone else took the ride instead. I don't know why I was spared, but I know this: some roads don't lead to destinations, they lead to choices. And some passengers aren't going anywhere. They're waiting for you to arrive.